Usually when we talk about the struggle to save the planet, the conversation almost always revolves around the science.
Right. It's all about the data.
Exactly. We just sort of assume that if we get the data right, or if we spread enough awareness, everybody will look at the charts and, well, everything will just fall into place. But what if that entire premise is just totally flawed?
Yeah, what if it's not a failure of science at all?
Right. What if instead you are actually watching this massive, high-stakes geopolitical game of poker, and they're playing with the Earth itself as the chips?
I mean, thinking about it that way completely alters how you consume the daily news. You stop seeing environmental policy as just an ecological debate, and you start seeing it as this huge, multi-layered coordination problem where basically everyone is hiding their cards.
And that is exactly our mission for this deep dive today.
Yeah.
We are going to decode the hidden strategic logic behind global environmental inaction.
It's a really heavy topic, but so necessary.
Totally. So our source for this is a dense but honestly fascinating academic paper from May 2026. It's published in the Global Review. It's by Farid Novin, and it's called Limits to World Growth, a Bayesian Game-Theoretic Analysis.
Catchy title, I know.
Yeah, very academic. And hey, just a quick heads up for you listening. This paper dissects some highly polarized recent moves by the U.S. and other global governments.
Right. It touches on some very raw nerves.
Yeah, it really does. So we just want to explicitly state we're not here to play politics. We aren't picking sides, left-wing or right-wing. We are just going to impartially report the cold, hard game theory the author uses to explain these actions, just so you can understand the underlying math of global diplomacy.
Exactly. We are analyzing the mechanics of the game board, not cheering for a specific player.
Yep.
And the author uses a very specific lens to do this called Bayesian game theory.
Which sounds intimidating, but we'll break it down.
Right. Essentially, the paper sets out to prove this controversial point. World leaders aren't acting out of ignorance when it comes to climate change. They are acting out of strategic rationality under conditions of deep uncertainty.
A strategic rationality, meaning they know the house is on fire, but they're like calculating whether it's cheaper to let the kitchen burn down rather than pay for the fire extinguisher.
That's a perfect way to put it.
But, before we get into the psychology of this poker game, we really have to understand the physical limits of the table it's being played on. The paper starts with some pretty heavy biophysical realities. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, the physical constraints.
The author points out that humanity is operating in ecological overshoot. Like we are using nature at 1.8 times the Earth's regenerative capacity.
And he grounds that number using the National Footprint and Biocapacity accounts. They actually calculated that Earth Overshoot Day fell on July 24th, 2025.
Wait, July 24th?
Yeah, late July. That means by then, humanity had already consumed all the biological resources that the Earth can theoretically renew in an entire year.
Wow. Every single day after July 24th is lived in the biophysical red.
It's like the ultimate maxed out credit card. I mean, if you spend twice your income every month, for a little while, your life looks great.
Right, yeah. You feel rich.
You're buying expensive dinners, living large. But the math catches up. And in the financial world, if a massive institution maxes out its debt, a central bank can step in as a lender of last resort. They just print more money to keep the system afloat.
Right, but you can't exactly print more Earth.
Exactly. There is no central bank for the planet. What's fascinating here is how the author takes that concept of ecological debt and applies it to the biosphere. Because when you default on an ecological debt, numbers don't just flash red on a screen in some bank.
Right.
The biosphere imposes physical adjustments. We are talking about forced rebalances.
Like what exactly?
Like climate destabilization, severe resource depletion, shifting weather patterns that just completely destroy agricultural yields.
So the Earth essentially sends a collection agency, and they physically repossess your infrastructure.
That is a very grim but totally accurate way to picture it. The paper actually references the Planetary Health Check 2025, which found that 7 of the 9 planetary boundaries have now been transgressed.
Yeah, I noticed one of those 7 is a recent addition. The paper emphasized that ocean acidification has officially crossed the threshold into the danger zone.
Yes. The ocean's chemistry is fundamentally altering, mostly because it's absorbing so much of our excess carbon. And compounding that, the Global Tipping Points report from 2025 concluded that humanity has already crossed a major Earth system tipping point.
Which one?
The widespread, irreversible death of warm water coral reefs.
Oh, man. Irreversible.
Yeah. We aren't approaching the edge anymore. For certain ecosystems, we have already gone over it.
There's this specific statistic in the paper from Dr. Louis Akenji that puts a terrifying number on this. Because of this accumulating stock imbalance, humanity now owes the planet 22 years of ecological regeneration.
It's massive.
And that is, if all the damage stopped completely today, just a 22-year freeze.
Right. It's an accumulated backlog. People often focus on just reducing this year's emissions, like let's cut back by 5%.
Yeah.
But the climate doesn't care about the annual flow. It cares about the total stock of carbon in the atmosphere. We have overdrawn our planetary account for decades.
Well, if we are in this massive, undeniable ecological debt, it makes you wonder why all our incredible technological advancements aren't bailing us out.
It's a green growth argument.
Exactly. We constantly hear about green growth. Every week there's a new headline about a breakthrough in solar panel efficiency or, a lighter wind turbine or a smarter power grid. But wait, hasn't tech always saved us in the past?
That's the popular narrative, yeah.
I mean, people predicted peak oil and mass starvation back in the 1970s, and human innovation just sort of engineered a way out.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the paper introduces a really crucial distinction to explain why tech isn't saving us this time. It's the difference between relative decoupling and absolute reduction.
Okay, relative versus absolute.
Right. So yes, our technology is infinitely more efficient. We use way less energy to produce a single unit of GDP than we did 50 years ago. That is relative decoupling.
Which sounds good on paper.
It does. The problem is that the global economy's sheer expansion has completely overwhelmed those efficiency gains. The UN's assessments actually confirm that our global material footprint is growing faster than our population.
So it's like we're making a much more fuel-efficient engine, but we're building billions more of them and driving them 5 times as far.
Exactly.
So the total fuel consumed still goes up.
In economics, they call that the Jevons paradox. It's a foundational concept in this paper. When an efficiency gain makes a resource cheaper or easier to use, it paradoxically leads to an increase in the total consumption of that resource.
Which, wild to think about.
Yeah, the author notes that even in the European Union, which has arguably the most advanced resource efficiency frameworks on the planet, we still see massive volatility. And in the industrializing BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, there is almost no real decoupling happening. They're just burning more to build more.
The paper highlights a stunning example of the Jevons paradox happening right now in the U.S. With artificial intelligence.
Oh, this part blew my mind.
Right. Because we tend to think of the digital economy as weightless or clean. It's just software, right?
Mm-hmm.
But U.S. data centers, driven entirely by the massive computing demands of AI, are projected to jump from 25 gigawatts of energy consumption in 2024 to 60 gigawatts by 2030.
Which is just a surge so massive it threatens to completely devour all the clean energy gains we made from the renewable transition.
60 gigawatts is unbelievable.
It is. Technology creates a relative efficiency, but then it just opens up a completely new frontier of massive unchecked consumption.
I have to push back a little here, though. What if that massive energy investment in AI leads to an artificial superintelligence that actually solves the grid problem?
The techno-optimist angle.
Yeah. Couldn't AI invent a way to scale commercial fusion power or figure out perfect carbon capture? It feels like we are investing energy now for a technological savior later.
It's a really common argument, but it ignores the brutal reality of physical timelines.
What do you mean?
Even if an AI spits out the perfect blueprint for a commercial fusion reactor tomorrow morning, the physical permitting, the supply chain extraction, pouring all that concrete and grid integration for thousands of new power plants, it would take decades.
Decades we don't really have.
Exactly. The biosphere doesn't care about blueprints. It only cares about the 60 gigawatts of actual physical energy being burned between now and 2030 to power those servers.
Okay, so we can't engineer a magic wand. The technology just creates more demand. That means it is entirely up to the humans operating the machines.
Which is the hardest variable to control.
Always is. And this brings us to the core mechanism of the paper, the Bayesian game theory of global governance.
This is where we analyze the poker game. The paper models the international dynamic as two massive players facing off across the table. The global north, representing advanced industrial economies, and the global south, representing developing and emerging economies.
And the author describes this as a prisoner's dilemma, but with incomplete information. Break down that Bayesian aspect first. How does that actually change the standard game?
Well, in a standard prisoner's dilemma, both sides know all the rules and all the payoffs. But in a Bayesian game, players probabilistically update their beliefs about each other based on incoming signals.
Okay, so they're adjusting their strategy as they go.
Right. Think of it like trying to read an opponent at the poker table. You don't know what cards they hold or what type of player they are. Are they a committed type, someone genuinely willing to take an economic hit for long-term sustainability? Or are they a self-interested type, someone just hiding behind green PR while secretly prioritizing short-term economic growth?
So what does this all mean? I keep thinking about this like a high-stakes college group project.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. You're sitting around the library table, and everyone promises the professor they are totally committed to doing their part. Everyone nods. But secretly, everyone is calculating. They're waiting to see if they can just free ride on the other students' hard work.
Because nobody wants to do all the heavy lifting.
Exactly. Nobody wants to be the sucker who stays up all night researching while the others go out to a party and still get an A.
The difference being that in international relations, there is no professor to hand out failing grades.
Ah, true. No authority figure.
Right. Without a central enforcer, you have to look for signals to figure out who is actually going to do the work. Game theory categorizes the pledges made at climate summits, like those nationally determined contributions, as cheap talk.
Because anyone can make a promise. Talk is cheap, literally. It doesn't cost anything to stand at a podium and say, you'll cut emissions by 2050.
Exactly. To actually build trust and prove you are a committed type, a player has to engage in costly signaling. You have to put real chips in the center of the table.
So what does that look like for a country?
For advanced economies, that means making verifiable, irreversible sacrifices that hurt in the short term. It means transferring massive amounts of unconditional finance to the developing world, or passing binding domestic laws that actively penalize their own fossil fuel industries.
Things a purely self-interested player or a bluffer would just never do.
Because without those costly signals, the mathematical choice for any nation is always to defect, to cheat. If you think the other guy's going to cheat, you have to cheat first to protect yourself. And if you think the other guy's going to cooperate, well, you can cheat and get a massive competitive advantage.
So either way, you win by cheating.
Without a penalty, defection is the dominant strategy.
That is incredibly dark. But logically, it's airtight. Let's look at how this theoretical game of defection is actually playing out in the real world. The paper details specific moves made on the board during 2025 and 2026.
Yeah, the paper highlights several major institutional shifts, most notably by the United States. In January 2025, the incoming U.S. administration signed executive orders withdrawing from the Paris Agreement for a second time.
Right, and the text notes the administration explicitly called the agreement an unfair one-sided ripoff, and they revoked the U.S. International Climate Finance Plan to prioritize domestic fossil fuel production. Again, we're just reporting the facts of the paper here.
Absolutely. And the regression went deeper. In January 2026, the administration withdrew the United States from the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change entirely.
Which is huge.
It is the foundational treaty that has underpinned all multilateral climate governance since 1992. And they also pulled out of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.
So when the world's largest historical emitter completely walks away from the table and takes their chips with them, how does that Bayesian updating process work for the remaining players? How do they rewrite their math?
It shatters any illusion of trust. If the biggest player demonstrates they are a self-interested type, the probability of mutual cooperation drops to near zero in the minds of everyone else.
They just assume everyone is playing for themselves now.
Exactly. And you see the immediate result in the data. The UNEP emissions gap report for 2025 showed that global greenhouse gas emissions grew to almost 58 gigatons in 2024.
I'll put that in perspective for you listening. We're supposed to be drastically cutting down every single year to hit the 1.5-degree target.
Instead, it's skyrocketing.
Right. Instead, we are adding the equivalent of another industrial revolution's worth of carbon to the atmosphere. We're heading toward 2.3 to 2.8 degrees Celsius of warming.
Which brings up a really critical factor in this game, the Global South's equity constraint.
Explain that one.
In game theory, cooperation is almost impossible to sustain if the players perceive the distribution of costs as fundamentally unfair.
This is a powerful point. Because if you are a developing nation, you look at the global north and say, hey, you used completely unconstrained cheap resources, coal, oil, gas, for over a century to build your immense wealth, your power grids, your cities.
And now the rules have suddenly changed.
Right. Now that it is our turn to industrialize and lift millions of our people out of poverty,
Yeah.
you are telling us we can't use those same cheap resources. You want us to buy expensive green tech from you instead. It seems so hypocritical.
It creates a profound legitimacy crisis. To transition to green energy without crippling their own economic growth, the Global South requires massive financial assistance. The UNE report actually states that global climate finance flows need to triple by 2030. Currently, they sit at only 1/3 of what is required.
But wait, I thought the global north was sending money to developing nations. What happened to those massive transition funds we heard about a few years ago?
You're thinking of the Just Energy Transition Partnerships.
Yes, the JGTPs.
Right. Billions of dollars had been committed to countries like South Africa, Indonesia, and Vietnam to help them retire coal plants early. But following the U.S. policy reversals in early 2025, a lot of that funding was disrupted or vanished entirely.
Oh, wow.
When you pull the funding, you prove to the developing world that your previous commitments were just cheap talk.
And we saw the direct result of that shattered trust at COP30 in Belém, Brazil in November 2025.
The Mikoran decision.
Exactly. The paper discusses it in depth. They managed some incremental gains on adaptation finance, but the critical piece, a binding roadmap to phase out fossil fuels, was completely blocked by petrostates.
Because nobody was willing to put their own economy at risk when the richest players were folding their hands.
Which leads us to the critical final section of the paper. We understand the rules, we know the types of players, and we see them actively defecting. So how does this game end? The author models several distinct probabilistic scenarios for our future.
Yeah, let's look at the math here.
Let's spend some time on these because this is where the math meets reality. Scenario A is given a 55 to 65% probability. This is mutual defection.
This is the default path. This is the boiling frog scenario. Nations keep up the diplomatic cheap talk. They attend the summits, they set net zero targets for 2070, but they systematically fail on actual implementation.
It's dragging their feet.
Exactly. The ecological debt quietly accumulates. In this scenario, the game doesn't end with the grand treaty. It ends when the biosphere forcibly imposes limits through systemic agricultural failures and coastal flooding.
Okay, that's the slow failure.
Mm.
But scenario D, which the paper gives a 35 to 45% probability, is an active nightmare. It's called competitive extraction.
This is a shift from a passive failure to coordinate into an aggressive, weaponized arms race.
An arms race for what?
Resources. Nations realize the transition is happening, but instead of cooperating, they actively race to hoard critical minerals, pump oil, and secure resources purely to gain geopolitical leverage before their rivals do.
We are already seeing the precursors to this, honestly. Nations slapping massive tariffs on green technology, banning the export of rare earth metals, treating solar panels and batteries like military assets.
It's the logic of a sinking ship.
Right. If you know there aren't enough lifeboats, you start tearing the ship apart to build your own raft, which only makes the ship sink faster.
It accelerates the biophysical collapse in the name of national security. But then the paper models scenario G, sitting at a 12 to 18% probability. Crisis-induced coordination.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the dark irony of this scenario is staggering.
Scenario G suggests that the only thing that can break the mathematical lock of the prisoner's dilemma is a synchronized, massive global shock.
The paper explicitly mentions the potential collapse of the AMOC, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation. That's the ocean current system that regulates the climate for the entire northern hemisphere.
It's a terrifying prospect.
If that collapses, it isn't a slow warming. It is an overnight restructuring of global weather. Crops fail simultaneously across continents.
The theory is that a shock of that magnitude instantly alters the political incentive structure. Much like the early days of COVID-19, policies that were considered economically impossible suddenly become reality in a matter of weeks.
Because they have to.
Right, because the cost of inaction finally exceeds the cost of cooperation.
It's a terrifying thought that the disaster we were trying to prevent might be the only thing that can force us to actually cooperate.
This raises an important question, though. What would it actually take to achieve what the paper calls Scenario C, the giant leap?
This is the good one.
Yeah, this is the pathway of mutual proactive cooperation before collapse. But the author gives it a dismal 8 to 12% probability.
So how do we engineer a game where cooperation actually makes sense?
It requires completely redesigning global institutions. Voluntary pledges will never work. The paper argues we need architectures that mimic the World Trade Organization or the International Atomic Energy Agency. There must be severe, unavoidable economic penalties for non-compliance.
You mean like trade embargoes?
Exactly. The author points to the Montreal Protocol, which successfully phased out the chemicals destroying the ozone layer.
Oh, right, the CFCs.
Yeah, it worked because it included strict trade restrictions against any country that refused to participate. To win the climate game, the economic penalties for cheating have to be overwhelmingly worse than the rewards of free riding. You have to make the cheap talk incredibly expensive.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today, from Bayesian math to ocean currents. And I want to bring all of these abstract concepts back down to you, the listener.
It's a lot to process for sure.
It really is. The next time you open a news app and you read a headline about a world leader giving a grand speech about a new climate pledge, or you read about a new tariff on imported solar panels, or a massive surge in energy demand from a shiny new AI tool, don't just consume the surface narrative.
Look at the underlying incentives. Read the table.
View it through the lens of this geopolitical poker game. Ask yourself, is this just cheap talk, or is this a costly signal? Are they actually putting chips in the pot, or are they just bluffing while they wait for someone else to pick up the tab?
Because the Earth's biophysical limits do not care about diplomatic rhetoric.
At all. The 22 years of ecological debt isn't a metaphor. It is a physical reality that will collect its due.
The biosphere doesn't negotiate.
And that leaves me with a final, lingering thought for you to chew on. It wasn't explicitly debated in Friednoven's paper, but it's sort of the natural conclusion of everything we've just discussed regarding these game mechanics.
What's the thought?
Well, if the core mathematical problem is that nation-states are hardwired by their very design to prioritize their own sovereign short-term economic survival above all else, is the very concept of a nation-state fundamentally incompatible with managing a shared global biosphere.
Wow, that is the ultimate structural limitation.
If the game board is the entire planet, and the current players are mathematically incapable of playing cooperatively without a central enforcer, do we eventually need a completely new type of player? Just something to mull over the next time you look at a map with all those borders drawn on it. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you, keep looking for the hidden rules of the game, and we'll see you next time.